Brexit. More Brexit, right? You guys want to hear more about Brexit. What we can do, can't do. You don't want to talk to me, that's for sure. Thank you, coworkers. All right. I'm just going to get off the stage. Please welcome Steve Hilton from Crowdpac, Daniel Korski, ex-Politico, and Natasha Lomas.
Welcome to our second Brexit panel of Disrupt London, officially entitled Face Off, Two Sides of Britain's Tech Future. Unofficially, WTF Happens Now, or my personal favourite, How to Have Your Brexit Cake and Eat It. Joining me to discuss what the UK's looming exit from the European Union means for UK entrepreneurs, we have Daniel Korski, former aide to David Cameron, and if not the key architect of the failed Remain campaign, at least a core insider.
It's not very good, is it?
Sorry about that. And Steve Hilton, co-founder of Crowdpac, former director of strategy for David Cameron, and a rare thing indeed, a tech entrepreneur who agitated for Brexit, but I don't think lives in the UK. Is that right, Steve?
I live in California.
You live in California, and you're voted for Brexit. OK. Let's kick off with a little audience poll, a little poll of our own. Put your hand up if you voted for the UK to remain in the EU. OK. And put your hand up if you voted for Brexit. Oh, dear. And put your hand up if you...
There is one
There was
person.
one.
It's amazing.
Did you bring him? Is he a friend of yours?
Yeah, that's your minion. Put your hand up if you could vote but didn't. OK, oh, there was a couple. OK. So in this audience, perhaps unsurprisingly, an overwhelming majority for Remain. So Steve, as the sole Brexiteer on the panel, please make the case for why leaving the EU is going to be great for UK entrepreneurs, such as all the ones in this room who voted to remain.
Well, I think the first thing I'd say about that is that it's too early to say. And the reason for that is that the idea of Brexit was to give policy freedom to the British government to do things that would help entrepreneurs and the economy and so on. It wasn't actually to put forward a particular set of policies or another. It was to give the freedom to the elected government to do what is necessary to boost the tech sector and other sectors. And so the real question is, now that we have that policy freedom, will the British government take advantage of that and do the things that are necessary to really help entrepreneurs in the tech sector? And I think in terms of what that looks like, what are the specific things that would mean, I think the best case that's been made on that, and I suspect you might agree about this, is actually from our mutual friend and colleague Rohan Silva, who many of you may know and certainly be aware of, a leading voice in the tech world here in the UK, who set out very soon after Brexit in a series of articles in the Sunday Times a really clear, positive, pro-enterprise, pro-entrepreneur agenda for what the British government should now do with the freedom that it has to determine policy, and that includes things like investing in skills training, in infrastructure, in changing and improving our immigration system so that we are more open to high-skilled talent from around the world, not just from the EU, but from all over the world, which is a great advantage in starting and building successful businesses, as many of you know. So there's a whole agenda there that's available for the government to take up and run with, free of any constraint that the EU might put in its way. The question is, will they do it? And so far, I think it's just too early to say.
Haven't you written quite negatively about the current government, in fact?
Well, my sense is that they are definitely not embracing that positive, dynamic, pro-enterprise agenda. Now, you could maybe let them off the hook a little bit and say, well, look, they've got their hands full dealing with the immediate consequences of negotiating our on. But I know there's this debate that's been going on here about, do we want a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit, and do we want to try and retain access to the single market and so on. My view is that the really big question is whether we have, and particularly for entrepreneurs and for all of you and everyone in the tech sector, do we have an open Brexit or a closed Brexit? Now, those of us on the conservative side, certainly, who argued for Brexit, I'm not talking about the kind of UKIP campaign, I'm talking about people like Boris Johnson and Michael Gove and myself, Daniel Hannan, who argued for Brexit. We put forward what I would describe as a vision of an open Brexit, where leaving the EU enables the UK to be more open, to be more engaged with the global economy, not just the European economy, more welcoming to high-skilled talent from around the world, and more engaged with fast-growing markets, not just the EU, but places like India and Brazil and China and so on. And that dynamic, outward-looking Brexit is what I think we need. That's what we argued for. It doesn't look to me as if Theresa May's government is pursuing that path at all, and rather, what they seem to be doing is going down a darker path, frankly, which I've described as closed Brexit. And that is something that is really damaging and dangerous, and I think is to be avoided at all costs. So I think we all need to make the case for the open Brexit that will help entrepreneurs in the tech sector generally.
I mean, Daniel, do you feel that there is as much potential positivity here? You voted for Remain, so you're
Well,
on the other
I mean,
side.
I think Steve comes to this question with the purest of hearts, with a real vision for a global, liberal country. I also think that it was fundamentally naive to think that we could have gone through this process and not unleash the hounds that we have unleashed. And so I will always be on Steve's side in wanting to embrace that open and liberal democracy. I just fundamentally believe that going through the process that we have gone through was always going to unleash some very dark forces in our society, which was always going to constrain governments and therefore produce a politics that was going to militate towards closedness, protectiveness, an opportunity for people to separate communities, and rather than embrace the world, rather draw in. That's what I thought was going to be inevitable in this process, even though I fundamentally accept that people like you come from this with the purest of hearts, as did the people that you have referred to, many of whom are my close friends. I think going forward, I like the concept of an open Brexit. I've talked about a smart Brexit because I think the tech community has to play a real role in defining not just what it needs, which I think there's been a little bit too much of. I mean, I think the debate has basically been divided into two. Pollyannish, it's all going to be great, life gives you lemons, make lemon juice, it's fine. And then, oh my God, the sky is falling, it's just terrible. And I think the truth is the tech community needs to, yes, create parameters that the government needs to operate within, or pressure onto the government, but also needs to operate in some kind of middle position, which is both knowing what is good for it, talent, access to markets, access to capital, but also what specifically those opportunities are that it can help provide. Many of the things, Steve, that you talk about, I would argue, were perfectly possible before. Some were not, but most of the things you just mentioned, infrastructure investment, access to markets and so on, perfectly possible before. In fact, I would say now we're going to go through a very difficult period trying to access the very markets we now have total access to, and we're going to go through a period where it's going to be really hard to get the talent, not just because there'll be border checks and complicated immigration rules, but because people will look to the UK and think, is this really the kind of liberal open place that I want to go and work at a tech startup? So that's going to be a real challenge. And I think it is now incumbent upon the society to do both what Steve says, which is to pressure the government, but also think through very clearly what are the kind of digital efficiencies that we can bring to bear to a new export licensing system if we can't be within the single market? What are the sort of ways in which we want to think through the actual nature of change that the government machine needs to go through?
Isn't this quite an important point, though, Steve? Isn't there a risk of the UK's sovereignty and this idea of freedom that you talked about effectively having to be bartered to foreign governments to cut these much-needed trade deals that a weakened UK outside the EU bloc is going to need to do? So isn't there a risk of actually losing some kind of control in this process?
Well, we don't have control within the EU. I mean, just I think today the government announced to the World Trade Organization that the UK would be taking a seat in that organization rather than at the moment where it doesn't have a seat, doesn't have a voice because it's through the EU. And so I think that I'll say something about trade deals and get into the specifics of that, but the overall point I want to make on trade deals is that they are not as important as is often made out to be the case. For example, I mean, you know, the evidence of that actually is probably sitting in your hands or in your pockets right now. If you look at something like the iPhone, that's designed where I live in California, where I started my business, built in China. The EU doesn't have a trade deal either with America or with China, but people can buy iPhones in the EU, and Apple is a very successful company. So I think the importance of this kind of the bureaucratic aspects of trade deals are overstated, and the importance of the fundamentals, which you will all understand in terms of designing and building great products that people want to buy, are often understated. But even specifically within the let's just put that to one side and say, yes, we do want to have trade deals. Of course we do. We do want to have access to other markets. I think actually you're going to find, certainly in the US, an enthusiasm to do that quickly now. And that's like a seriously important market because there's that shared sense with the incoming administration of a rejection of the old-fashioned 20th century bureaucratic way of doing things that the EU represents in the eyes of some, and actually an embrace of that more buccaneering, enterprising worldview that a post-Brexit UK could be a leading example of.
So Trump is an opportunity for the UK.
Trump, I mean, whatever you think of him, is absolutely a huge opportunity economically for the UK and for UK-based entrepreneurs in terms of showing the world that actually this will not diminish the UK status, but raise the UK status.
Daniel, you want to?
Well, I mean, look, it's hard to sit on this panel and not repeat a series of debates we've had over many months, debates that ultimately my side lost and Steve's side's won. But I do think there's part of what Steve says that I agree with and part that I disagree with. I think that it is true that we will, under President Trump, once he gets his administration in place, will want to prioritize a US-UK deal more so than his predecessor. But I also think it is the case that it'll take many years before the UK has extracted itself from the European construct to be able to conduct such a trade negotiation. I don't think the UK is even close to having the capacity to do so. And I do worry that the way Trump is talking about trade deals, as if trade deals that give a surplus to the US are the only positive deals, is going to put the UK in a very difficult position. So yes, he will be interested in a UK-US trade deal because he's a sort of bilateral kind of guy, and because for a whole series of reasons he sees the UK very fondly, but I do also think that he's got an underlying set of assumptions about the nature of trade deals that are not particularly liberal and go against what I think will ultimately be a positive outcome for both parties, which is to say trade deals aren't only good if there's a constant surplus to one side or the other. But I think we've got to zoom out even further and to say, look, we are losing access, potentially, very easy access to a great set of trading relationships in Europe in exchange for a set of trading relationships that are going to be difficult to get. We don't have the capacity to negotiate for now. And once we have them in place, will present us with some very complex choices. So people say, Australia, New Zealand, great examples. Like, if we boosted trade 10 times with Australia, it would obviously never make up for the kind of trade that we've got with Belgium. And even if we were to say, yes, we'll boost it 20 times, there will be some policy preferences on the Australian and the Kiwi side, which are not going to sit so well with the Welsh farmer that's basically going to find themselves undercut, because what do the Australians want? They want a good deal for agricultural products. So all I'm saying is, I'm all for free trade. I also think it's true that not every deal is required in order for entrepreneurs to engage, but I think we should just be quite sanguine about the difficult task that is ahead, and go back to the government and have them explain to us quite clearly how they intend to make up for the trade lost, potentially trade lost, with a series of trade partners in the European Union with whom we have had a very established and positive set of relations.
Let's go back a little and talk about what happened. One of the criticisms, the key criticisms, is that the government didn't have a plan B. There was no plan for what happened if people were going to vote for Brexit. Daniel, I mean, as an insider there, why did no one think of that?
Well, look, I mean, at the end of the day, it is an absolutely fair question. I think the then Prime Minister was quite clear that he didn't want to precipitate anything. He didn't want to assume to be able to win the referendum or lose the referendum, and as a result, he felt it would be the most appropriate thing to have that referendum and to see what happened afterwards. You know, history is judging that, as we know, but now there's a new team in place, a team that is seen to have more of the support of the majority that voted, and it is now going to be up to them to define what they think Brexit ought to look like. There's a case in the High Court which is going to determine the extent to which Parliament will play a role in helping to define that. But I think it is right and proper for that new team to be in place and to deliver the strategy for the country going forward.
I mean, just to that point, I think that you know, I was against having a referendum. That was not the way I thought we should have handled this, and I made the case internally before even the 2010 election. You know, I've long believed that we should leave the EU, as did many people who ended up nevertheless arguing to stay, and going back at least 20 years. And my argument was that we should make that part of the official Tory policy platform in a general election, and so therefore you would have the time to prepare, and everyone would know that if the Tory government was elected, you would leave the EU, and that whole process, I think, would have therefore been much better handled that way. That's my personal view, and I think actually, whatever we think about the arguments and the outcome, it is very striking to me just how divisive this referendum was, and obviously it's not divisive.
That remains to a degree.
That's right. It's really striking, much more than any democratic event I've ever experienced in my lifetime, not just in this country, but around the world. I've been involved in many elections, you know, going back decades around the world, and I think that the...
Can I push you a bit to say that one of the reasons that's the case is because I think the Leave side unleashed some terrible demons in our society. They allowed a discourse that has really riven society, you know, in many areas apart. And I accept that that was not all of the Leave side, but I think that asking that question and proceeding through the gate of that referendum allowed those things to happen. And I'd be curious to hear, do you ever think that it could have been possible to conduct the referendum without that ever happening?
Well, I'll give you a personal perspective on that, which is that I wasn't particularly planning to get involved that much. As you pointed out, although, you know, I have a Crowdpac is now launched in the UK, so I have a business interest in what happens in the UK, and we're just about to launch in France, so we have, you know, we are interested from a business point of view, but I don't live here, and I wasn't particularly planning to get involved, but actually, the thing that really persuaded me otherwise, I'm afraid, to take the other side of this argument was just the way in which, you know, the incredibly kind of overheated and extreme language and argument used by the Remain side about what would happen if
Project Fear.
Exactly. I thought that was deeply irresponsible and negative, and in a way that galvanized me into getting involved, because I was really sickened and disgusted by it, frankly. And I think that I would agree that there are some people on the other side who did too, but a lot of that, I would say, was in response to the kind of rhetoric that was coming out of the official campaign, which basically said to people that, you know, that any kind of you know, opinion that differed from the official view made you not just have a different view about what was in the national interest, but you didn't care about the national interest. That you actually wanted, in the words of George Osborne, to see a meaner, narrower, poorer country, that you wanted that. In other words, the official campaign questioned people's motives in a way that I thought was really unacceptable. And I think, looking back on it, it was a very... that's why I think it was so divisive. I think that both sides can look back and say, well, look, the way that campaign was conducted has led it to be a very divisive event, and still is. That's why I think it's all the more important. Actually, I'm very happy to go back as much as you want, but I do think it's really important to try and look forward and say, okay, it's happened now. How are we going to try to make the best of it, not just from an economic point of view, but from a social and cultural point of view as well, because that's also really important.
Well, can I just
well,
say,
you know, it was not in this room. Of course, it's not divisive. There's a complete unity in this room, with one exception. But around the country, even in London, you know, people say, "Oh, it's London against the North." And even in London, 40% of Londoners voted to stay. And I think that just to dismiss the fact, I mean, you know, this is the big argument, I think, that is really going on, and you're seeing reflected not just in Brexit but elsewhere. And I think this is where I think it is important, actually, for the tech sector to do some self-reflection here, which is that for the last, I don't know, 30 years or so, the world has been run according to an ideological orthodoxy, a kind of technocratic orthodoxy that is completely positive about globalization, about automation, about centralization of government and other things. And that has created enormous winners and benefits around the world. It's produced a new generation of incredibly wealthy people and more broadly spread opportunity. But it has also delivered for millions of people real economic hardship, stagnation, and a kind of rending of the social fabric that they're used to. And I think that what you're seeing in the Brexit vote, in Trump's win, all over the place, in a way is I mean, you know, relating to the name of this event, in a way it is the revenge of the disrupted, the people who have been disrupted by this agenda that has been in place, the kind of Davos agenda that is uncritical of globalization, automation, and centralization, and is callous and disregarding of the impact of that on real people. Real people are suffering as a result of that. And I think the tech sector has to think about the real human consequences of our innovations, which are great for some, but really disastrous for many.
Can I just challenge that for a second? Because I think it is incredibly compelling to listen to you paint this fantastically large narrative that ties together protests in North Dakota, with protests in Sunderland, with protests for the votes for the Danish People's Party and the Progress Party and so on. Unfortunately, I just don't think that it bears scrutiny. If you look at median wages in the UK, it is a fundamentally different story than it is in the US. Now, that isn't to say that there aren't people who haven't suffered, or there aren't people who don't feel that their lives have been disrupted.
Hang on, I mean, the Bank of England governor, I think, was it yesterday or today, made the point that it is actually very similar in terms of median. The last decade, I think he said, was the first time since, was it 1860, that people were poorer at the end.
So what is interesting, if you take that data and you compare it to the PPI, the price parity index, which is not to say what is their wage, but is to say what does that wage buy, and you actually compare it to all the countries that we're talking about, it actually turns out that both the US and the UK are pretty high on that list, and it's actually Estonia that is at the far end. So the question isn't just, is there a magical number that shows that wages are declining? If they're declining for a certain period, or the greatest period since another number, then ergo, people don't like being disrupted. As a result, you know, you get Brexit. I'm saying there are people who have been adversely affected. There are people who are deeply uncomfortable with the progress of change. They don't like the fact that they used to walk down the street and the streets were white, and now they're not so white. There used to be chip and chip shops, now there are curries. The world is changing.
What's really bad is none of that, but actually walking down a street where there's nothing, because there's just boarded up shops, and that is the real tragedy, where there's no economic activity, and that is a real fact of life, not in the parts of cities that we all hang out in, but in huge parts of this country and other countries where you've just seen a real, and it's not fair, I think, to
And you're saying
paint
technology
this all
is in part to blame for that?
Of course it is.
Yeah.
And the benefits are very real too. The benefits in terms of
consumer choice.
Exactly, all of that stuff, great. But let's not forget that when we talk about winners and losers, as people always do, there are real losers. And I think the point about incomes and so on is not some statistical comparison from country to country. It's about how people feel in relation to what they have expected, which is this notion of progress, that you earn more, that you move up the ladder, that things get better. And that has stopped for many people.
All I'm suggesting is that it is not.
And they're not typically the people
There's not one story that
events like
there's
this
not one story that
get
starts
involved
in North
in
Dakota
any of these debates.
and goes to here, right? What I'm trying to say is, in order to understand each and individual place, we've got to look at it individually and not strew together a story that doesn't bear empirical support. And we also have to accept that there is a social, cultural dimension to this, even if it's uncomfortable to accept, which is that people do not like the browning of their societies. And if they certainly feel at the same time that there is a threat to their wages, threat to their jobs, which in many areas they do, and in many areas there have been that threat, although I would argue not as wide as people assume. We just have to accept that there is an uncomfortable social-cultural dimension to this.
Look, I'm not denying that, but I think that the way in which the people in power, let's use that term.
People like you and I.
I'm not anymore.
Well,
But people like, I just think that terms like elite and establishment just are overused, although I use them liberally. But let's just say the people in power, I think that because they slip so easily to that point, because it's comforting, it avoids self-scrutiny of the actual consequences of the policy agenda that they've pursued, which has delivered economic stagnation in many places, massive increases in inequality.
We're the fastest growing country in the G7.
Yeah, but that
wages have
number
not been
doesn't
declining.
tell you the human story. I think that there's
No, but you said we're stagnating, but we're not stagnating. So if you say we're stagnating, so accept that we're not stagnating.
It's stagnation for many people and places, not
That's
overall.
always the case. Like in the greatest
Yes, but the
areas of
divide
prosperity,
is
there are people who are
starker.
stagnating.
The divide is starker and bigger.
The divide on this panel is very
than
stark.
it's been, and I just think it's all very, if you want to reassure yourself that this was all the result
That's not what I'm saying.
of racists, then the reason I worry about that is it means that you won't actually look back, you collectively won't look back over the policy agenda of the last 20, 30 years that's been implemented not just by Tory government but by the Blair government before it and so on. The agenda really set by the kind of corporate and technocratic elite, and not ask the questions about how it is that the untrammeled implementation of that agenda has left poverty getting worse, people's lives.
But poverty is not getting worse.
It is getting worse.
Can we not start with the facts? Poverty is not getting worse. This country
getting-
is getting richer. There have never been as many jobs, and the wealth is getting further spread than ever before,
It's getting
including
worse.
generationally. So we've got to start with some facts.
It's getting worse in the sense that you have that every
This
generation.
is the richest time ever on this planet. People are healthier. They live longer. We have diseases
The
that are
divide
cured.
between rich and poor is increasing there, right? So the
I just think that's an
disparity is getting
incredibly complacent thing
It
to
doesn't
say.
mean we can't get better,
when you
but
just
we
can
should-
look, you can walk sort of 10 minutes from here and see entrenched poverty generation after generation. That's in the sense in which it's getting worse.
Well, I'm
In this
object to that as much as you would. But it doesn't
well,
mean that
I
at
don't
the aggregate level, I say this
don't
country
think
is
that-
stagnating
I
or
don't
it is
think
getting
that-
poorer.
I don't think that. I didn't say that this country is stagnating. I said that there is economic stagnation alongside the great benefits that have accrued over the last few years. And so I think that to try and say, look, the only reason that Brexit happened was
I
because
didn't say
people
that.
are. You went immediately to that argument.
No, I said I felt that
You
it
did.
was missing in your explanation. You prefer to talk about a very economic argument which I believe is not based on empirical data. I wanted to add to that a sense of social and cultural alienation, which partly is a function of the changing of our societies that people don't like. You can add to that. You can
Yes, but it's not just about race and identity. It's also about community. It's also about the sense of what's happening physically to our communities, to the way we used to live our lives, to the kinds of jobs that we, the jobs are now increasingly the white-collar jobs, the careers and professions that are disappearing. That is an
automation
instability
that's
and a lack of security. It's not just about race. The social fabric of people's lives has been ripped up in many places, and it's very unsettling. And I think that to dismiss it all, or to just to focus on race and culture as being
But I wasn't trying to do that. But in turn, I think
miss
that
the points pretty spectacularly.
But I didn't do that. What I fear is that, what I hear from you is you want to tell a story about a society in disruption, which I agree with you produces some winners and some losers, and we've got to do more to help the losers.
Yeah, but people have been saying that for 30 years, and it hasn't happened.
But you and I both went into government in order to do our bit.
Yeah,
You did your bit,
and
I
we-
did my bit, and some things we
and we
succeeded in,
didn't
some
do
things
enough.
we failed in. I agree.
I look back on it, and I think the main thing that we came in saying was we're going to deal with the financial crisis and respond to that, and I think that was well handled and in a kind of emergency sense. But the big transformation that was going to be made was to reverse this agenda of centralization, to give people more power and control, to really make them feel, in reality, that they had more say over the things that matter to them in their lives, about the shape of their communities and the physical spaces around them, over their kids' education, their healthcare, the services they use, all of that stuff. And that was barely delivered at all.
But your great insight of the big society and your fantastic book, the recent book you wrote about making things more human, I mean, paraphrasing a complex argument, I think are absolutely spot on, and I think you can take great credit in delivering a trend towards devolution in this country that is for the first time seeing a reversal of that ratchet. And
not enough.
Okay, so I was going to say, you and I can
agree.
agree.
A long way.
No, I agree with that, but I think that you're doing yourself a disservice by saying none of this happened. I do think it is currently happening, and I agree with you. It needs to go faster, it needs to go further, people need to engage in a fundamentally different way at a local community where people can get closer to decisions. I agree with all of that, but I see a much more positive set of developments taking place, partly in credit to your work, than it sounds to me that you're seeing when you think about our time in government.
So the question for this audience is, how can technology help to heal this divided society that we have? I mean, maybe it's been a negative in some ways, but how can the people here
I think that,
bring something positive?
I think that is genuinely a question where you want that entrepreneurial input for people, individuals on a human level, say, here's something where I've got an idea and technology can help with that. So my very small, modest contribution to that is literally the company that I started, Crowdpac, originally in the US and now spreading internationally, which is all about giving people back political power, to take the power over the funding of politics and running for office and standing for, whether that's local government or national government, whatever it may be, and make it easier for everyone to get involved, to make it simpler, to demystify the process, to bring crowdfunding instead of the corrupt funding that we've seen that kind of makes this elite takeover possible. So that's my contribution. Say, well, let's use technology and data to open up politics and give people a real sense of political control. And I think there's just so many opportunities in the way services are delivered and the way people live their daily lives beyond what we've already seen in terms of retail and information and entertainment and how technology is helping with that. I think that is for individual entrepreneurs to respond to, because there are real social problems. And I think that tech, because it's so creative and when done best, starts with a real human need that is unmet and tries to meet it. Christ, there's a lot of needs out there that need meeting.
I would pick up on the last bit, which is to say, I look at the extraordinary transformation we've seen in B2C and B2B, and I think it's now time for that transformation to come to B2G. And I think right now, a whole host of public services are being delivered poorly, slowly, through large suppliers that have very little interest in nimble, agile, and citizen-focused services. And if there's anything I think entrepreneurs can do, is to try to see how the services they're providing to consumers may be able to be provided in a government marketplace. Because I think if half the people in this room start thinking about how to deliver, government services or public services, because it's not all about national governments, it's also about local governments. If half this room begins to think about that differently, I think we could see over the next 10, 15, 20 years a real transformation in the quality and responsiveness and, of course, also the price of those services.
Yeah, that's
right.
a huge
We're
point.
almost out of time.
Okay.
But just before we have to be dragged off stage, I want to do a quick rapid fire one. If you could keep one component of the EU after we Brexit, whether it's passporting, freedom of movement, what would it be and why? Daniel?
I think the ability to trade freely across the borders, to scale your business, to travel anywhere, to rock up in a country and say, I want to sell my products or my services, the ability to do that totally unhindered, nobody stopping you, nobody imposing non-tariff barriers you can't dream of, nobody stopping that free flow of
Steve.
commerce.
That is the EU. I don't know.
So, well, it might be.
Which is, I think a good argument for it. I think what's happened culturally as a result of being in the EU, in terms of people doing those things and traveling and getting to know people.
Doing those bad things.
Doing those great things. And
the one thing you'd keep.
The coming together of people, for the diversity, let's call it diversity. It's a bit of a jargon term, but I think that's the word I'd choose.
And the current government, are they going to deliver hard or soft Brexit?
Hard.
Hard.
All right. Well, on that hard note, we have to leave it. Sorry. Thank you ever so much, guys.
Thank you.
There you go. All right.